Infosys bought back shares worth a massive 18,000 crore rupees in 2025. TCS announced a 17,000 crore rupee buyback in 2023. And in 2012, it was Reliance which said it wanted to conduct a buyback worth 10,000 crore rupees. But why do companies even conduct such stock buybacks? And why do some people criticize it, even though investing legends like Warren Buffett love a good buyback? In this video, we'll tell you everything that you need to know about the good and bad of buybacks. So imagine a company sitting on crores of cash. What are their options? Your first thought will be that maybe they could invest in new projects, set up factories, or even spend on money to research and develop innovative ideas. All of this will help keep them ahead of competition and could allow them to grow faster and become bigger. And that's completely right. Most companies do this when they have excess cash. But let's say they have crores of rupees left over even after all these investments. What could they do then? Well, companies like to reward their shareholders or the owners of the company. And they do this by paying a dividend, or they could end up attempting to buy back their own shares from the market. Now, the difference between the two is that when a company pays dividends, every shareholder gets their proportional share of it. There are no exceptions. You don't actually get to choose whether you want the dividend or not. One day, the money suddenly gets credited to your bank account. But with a stock buyback, you get to decide what to do. If you want to sell your shares back, that's great. But if you want to hold on to them, that's also fine. The company isn't forcing anyone to participate. Now, dividends are straightforward, so we won't talk about it today. But if you want to know more, we'll link one of our earlier videos explaining this in the description. So for now, let's unpack buybacks. So think of a buyback as a cash for shares deal. The company offers to buy shares directly from its shareholders. Let me give you an example. Say a stock is trading at 100 rupees. The company might offer to buy it back at 120 rupees. That's a 20% bonus or premium just for selling your shares back to the company. Now you might be wondering why they'd pay more than the market price. And the answer is simple. Because they need to incentivize shareholders to actually give up shares. Otherwise, there's nothing in it for the shareholders. And like I said earlier, you actually don't need to give up your shares if you don't want to. It's your choice. The company isn't forcing anyone to participate. But why do companies conduct buybacks in the first place? Well, the simplest answer is that they have excess cash and they have nowhere better to put it. So dividends and buybacks are a way to transfer the cash back to the owners of the company. Also, just a side note, did you know that buybacks were much more tax efficient for shareholders when compared to dividends till October of 2024 in India? See, dividends were taxed in the hands of the shareholders. So for someone in the highest tax slab, they'd pay tax on dividends and it would amount to around 35%. But buybacks were tax-free in the hands of the shareholders. Rather, the company would end up paying tax of around 23%, including cess and surcharge, on whatever income it distributed. Now, even though that difference has disappeared and shareholders now pay tax on buybacks, companies such as Infosys, they continue to go down the buyback route. And that is because of another powerful reason, that buybacks are a signaling tool. And let me give you a recent example, right? Infosys announced that 18,000 crore rupee buyback. Over the past year, the stock had dropped nearly 20% because investors have been worried about AI threatening Indian IT firms. They fear that AI will make these companies rely more on in-house technology and less on outsourcing. Now imagine Infosys already has a massive cash pile and is investing heavily to get ahead of the AI curve. By announcing this buyback, they're essentially saying, look, you may not believe in us yet, but we believe in ourselves. We think you're undervaluing our stock and we are happy to buy back shares from you at a fair price. That signal alone can be enough to restore market confidence and push the stock price higher. There's a famous example from about a decade ago with Reliance Industries actually. Their shares were trading at around 700 rupees and the management announced that they'd buy back shares at around 870 rupees. And slowly but surely, the price climbed past that level as investors jumped on board. And here's the thing, stock prices almost always appreciate towards the buyback price. And maybe that's why Warren Buffett loves well-executed buybacks. In his 2004 letter to shareholders, He said that when stock can be purchased below a business's actual value, it's probably the best use of cash. And what he meant that is if a company buys its own shares for cheap, it becomes a great investment. Because when the market eventually recognizes the true value, the price rises and the company has essentially invested in itself at a discount. But I want you to know that not everyone is a fan of buybacks. People criticize it too, and I think it's worth understanding why they have a problem with the practice. Criticism number 1 is the cash preservation problem. See, history is full of companies that burned through their cash reserves because management didn't actually see trouble coming. Take the investment bank Lehman Brothers in the mid-2000s. They were riding high and announced that they would be buying back nearly 20% of all their shares. And just a few months later, the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008 hit and the bank went bankrupt. Or consider BHP Billiton, a mining giant that bought back shares in 2011 after booming profits. Within months, they realized it was a terrible mistake because the commodity cycle turned. And in the year following the buyback, their stock price dropped over 20%. The management simply didn't forecast the downturn that was coming, so you could say that they spent all their money buying back their stock when it was already expensive. Criticism number 2 is the executive compensation. Here's where things get quite sketchy. See, a significant portion of executive compensation includes bonuses and stock options, and that is often tied directly to the stock price performance or the earnings per share. And I'll break down how executives can actually game this system. Now, say a company has 100 shares and earns 200 rupees in profit. The earnings per share is 2 rupees. Now imagine the company buys back 10% of its shares. That's 10 shares that are withdrawn from the pool. The earnings stay at 200 rupees, but now there are only 90 shares. Suddenly, the EPS, the earnings per share, jumps to 2.2 rupees. The executives haven't created new value. They've just reduced the share count. But now their compensation, which is tied to that EPS, it goes up. And this is why buybacks were actually considered market manipulation for a long time. And here's a secret. Until 1981, in both the US and UK, buybacks were essentially illegal. Companies avoided them because they feared that buybacks might bring manipulation charges upon them. Criticism number 3 is wealth concentration. Now think about the population that actually benefits from buybacks. Since stocks are typically owned by a small subset of the population, usually the ones that are already wealthy, buybacks only enrich them further. The ones who criticize buybacks argue that all the excess cash could instead be used to pay bonuses to employees, maybe higher wages, or even provide better benefits and improve working conditions for the employee base. Because we all know that if workers feel that they're looked after, they will be more productive, and that will benefit the company in the long run. When Howard Schultz returned as the Starbucks CEO in 2022, he actually suspended buybacks. He said that it would allow the company to invest more in their people and stores, and that it was the only way to create long-term value for all stakeholders. So, does this mean stock buybacks are all bad? Not necessarily, because for every company that failed to preserve cash for a downturn, there's a counterexample like Apple, which continues to execute buybacks while blowing past expectations year after year. And for every complaint that executives manipulate stocks for personal gain, there's global research suggesting that the actual price impact of buybacks is minimal, with prices rising only marginally. Also, the cash flowing to shareholders, it doesn't disappear into a black hole. Research shows that shareholders are highly likely to reinvest that capital, often in smaller public and even private firms, that can support innovation and job growth throughout the rest of the economy. So there is a trickle-down effect. So there you have it. Stock buybacks are just a tool, and like any tool, they can be used well or poorly. When a company like Apple uses excess cash to buy undervalued shares, it can create long-term shareholder value. When companies like Lehman Brothers burn through reserves right before a crisis, it's a disaster. And as to whether management opts for buybacks to manipulate their own pay, it's hard to actually prove that. And if you have any thoughts on buybacks, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.